Last week, two guys got back from a round Australia lap. They went in opposite directions from Perth and they returned to Perth almost 14,000 kilometres later. Harold Murphy did it in 14 days and Pete Petrovsky 17 days. And yesterday, which was Saturday, we got together all the Model Y people from Tesla Owners Club in WA, and we had a bit of a Q&A session. So here's that.
Q&A session in a minute. Just a couple of pointers. As you know, Harold's done this trip before in a Model X 4 years ago, so Harold had the knowledge. He knew where to go, he knew who to talk to at the roadhouses, he knew all the information. So basically, he did it with his eyes closed almost. Elon was watching out for him. This was the first time for Pete. Not only was his first time an electric car past Kalbarri, I believe, it was also his first time in any car past Broome. So that's quite a challenge to take up. So great effort on both these guys, especially you, Pete, for going blind. Yeah. And I cannot believe you got back in 17 days. I think it's a phenomenal effort. Harold getting back in 14 days, it still surprised me, but Harold is probably the most organised person I know. So, and that's true.
That's one word for it.
Yeah. So
I need to interject. I definitely didn't fly blind. I definitely had two of the best eyes looking out for me, and that was Harold, who's obviously done it before. He's also a practicing electronics engineer, and Rob, who was the 10th person to do it. So Harold was the 6th. So Rob and Robin were the 10th people to go around Australia. They've been across the Nullarbor 5 times. Few people know, but Rob used to actually be a truckie, and he actually knows Australia like the back of his hand.
Not out of WA though. But I have been around Australia in '92 as well.
And he's got the most phenomenal memory, and I mean the things that he would tell me that Nunaterra, there'd be a really annoying bell at the door, so if I was opening my laptop not to do it, little niche things like that. I just can't believe his memory, but yeah, so couldn't have been in better hands.
All right, Harold, anything to say?
Oh no, look, all kudos to Pete, because this was his first time, and it's a really challenging thing to do it for the very first time. Everything is new, everything's different. Just even having to stretch to sort of get better economy, doing the long stretch 400 k's between Broome and Fitzroy Crossing, that was a really gutsy thing, and it's a big task for anyone to do for the first time. And yeah, all kudos to Pete for doing it in his awesome brand new car. In fact, it's actually his wife's awesome brand new car, so kudos to her too for letting him do it.
Loud.
Range anxiety, did you have a little bit?
What is that? You heard of that before?
No, not at all.
Range confidence.
We'll go on, Pete.
Well, look, yes, I suppose we did. Look, another really handy thing that I had was Harold's developed a very handy app, and it's like a glide scope, and it tells you how many watt hours you need to stay below to reach your destination, assuming the terrain is flat. And so sometimes the Tesla estimator will be showing -2 or -1, or getting there with 1%, but I still felt confident that I would get there because of the app, so that really helped. But look, range anxiety it's something that should be confined to third world countries. If we had first world infrastructure, I mean, that stretch from Gympie, where the superchargers started in northern Queensland, right past Adelaide all the way to Clare. I think I did that in 2.5 days. It was more than 3,000 kilometres, and it was just so easy. There's no worrying about whether a charger will be available because they've got a 99.96% uptime. There's at least 3 stalls to any charger, so even if 1 or 2 are taken, you know you're going to be able to charge. And it's just there's no worrying about apps, internet connectivity. There's no human factors involved, which is the big thing that we'll probably talk about a bit later. There's no worrying about your cables. You just come in, plug. Half an hour later, you can drive another 3 hours. So, but it was the exact complete other end of the spectrum in some northern parts of Australia where there's no chargers. Where all we have there is a 3-phase 32 amp. That was the most common plug socket that we charge on. And it's just a matter of negotiating with the owners to see if they'll let you plug in, and that can take 3 to 6 hours. It's rather than half an hour.
So one example of the fact that the car would be pessimistic is I was going from Portsmouth Caravan Park to Pardue, and I had a short charge because I had this time pressure to try and get there before they shut. So I was trying my best to put as much in my car as I could, but also I had to take off so I get there in time. And that's a bit of a juggling act that you've got to do, unfortunately, on AC charging. And my car at the start said I'd arrive with minus 18%. And it militantly kept on saying minus 18, then minus 15, then minus 10. And it never even conceded 0 until 3 kilometres before I got to Pardue. And then at 1 kilometre go, it conceded, oh, you're going to have 1%. So I arrived on 1%. But of course, like I said, I've made this very crude app that just looks at your battery and just tells you what you're going to have left. So that was very useful. But yeah, range anxiety, as Pete said, on the eastern seaboard where you've got superchargers everywhere, is non-existent. This is the shortest range car that you can buy as a Tesla these days. And on the eastern seaboard, it's just no issue. Everywhere else, it's kind of this juggling act. Especially between, at the moment, Broome and Fitzroy Crossing, it's 400 kilometres of nothing in between, literally nothing in between. So that's where there's an issue. But once you've got supercharging and fast DC charging, it's not an issue. The great news is, from the end of next year, from Perth to Kununurra, Perth to Eucla, there'll be fast DC chargers everywhere. So then there'll be 0 range issue, or range anxiety.
So what sort of speed were you going to get your 400? Sitting around about 90?
It depends.
Yeah.
So
no, for that stretch between Broome and
yeah, that was roughly about 90.
Yeah.
Started a little bit slower
and
because we got up before dawn. So it's great for kangaroos to go a bit slower. So we're doing sort of 70-ish, and then just getting the runs on the board, and then easing up to 90. And then once you know that you're going to make it, you can do the 110.
And what did you end up having left in the battery when you got there?
Oh, actually, there was a few roadworks. Yeah, there were a few roadworks, so it was actually a bit more than I thought. I think it was probably 4 or 5%.
Yeah.
But I was moderating that by speed, so I sped up as I knew that there was more to spare.
And did you find that the cameras were picking up kangaroos? Because I reckon they don't.
I didn't see the kangaroo I hit. The camera didn't see it.
No, they don't see them.
No, the kangaroo. No.
There has been circumstances where people have put up footage where the car braked for a kangaroo, but I think that's more an exception rather than the rule. So
I think AI has trouble with things that hop.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. So I don't know if it's been asked yet, but is the supercharger network between Adelaide and Brisbane any good?
It's just, all I did when I got to Clare was navigate to Gundagai, which is just here, and I put the Moonee Ponds supercharger as a waypoint just so that it would go through Melbourne. I didn't want it to sort of skirt across. All you do is you just do that, and it just says your next stop is Horsham, and you'll be there for 10 minutes. And sure enough, you're there for 10 minutes. And then you just go to the next one and the next one. While you're doing that, you don't care what your range is, you don't care what your state of charge is, you don't care what your car is, where you're going. It just does it in one navigation point, and it just does the whole route and lays it out before you. It's just awesome.
The one overriding principle that I think we should have is anything to do with an EV should be as good, if not better, than the internal combustion engine equivalent. So when you pull up to a service station, there might be a pump that's out of action, there might be 2 or 3, but you know you can still fill up because there's another 6 or 7 that are still available. And it seems like Tesla is the only charging network that seems to understand that point, because there's a lot of chargers that are being put in and it's just the one DC charger. Thankfully the WA network will have at least an AC as a backup, but AC is obviously very slow. But with Tesla, you know that even if one stall is out of action, you know if the 2 are taken, you can still charge. So and the other thing, I've noticed there were a couple of superchargers that made provisions for a EV towing a trailer, so that was really good to see. But we need to see more of that, because you pull up to a petrol station, whether you have a caravan or a horse float, it doesn't matter, it should be the same with a charger. So we should think about towing EVs, and we should think about multiple chargers rather than the one.
That was actually going to be my question when you got the supercharger. Did you find that actually putting an area which made it easier to actually get the down and
Yeah, mostly, except there are a couple in shopping centres which were sort of a little bit difficult to find and get to.
A bit like carrying up.
Yeah.
If you've never been there before, it's a bit hard.
So it is a bit hard. Getting back to superchargers and convenience, like I said, you just basically navigate and it just takes you there. The difference once I got past Gympie was then I had to look up PlugShare to see all the Queensland electric superhighway chargers, and then I had to go and manually put those addresses into the navigation and add them as waypoints. And then I was trying to work out, well, because there's only one charger and it's only got one nozzle that works at one time, I didn't want to risk having it EV'd and me having to wait. So then I'd sort of do this thing of, I'd plot them out and go, well, I'll have about 60% when I get to this charger, 40% when I get to this one, and 10% when I get to that one. Well, I'll just try and charge at this one just in case, and then I could leapfrog, because I was concerned that I was going to have to spend time waiting. But the inconvenience of having to add all these addresses in, because it's not on the navigation on the map, and then also different apps. So I had to use the ChargeFox app, the Evity app, and I think the EV app as well. Yep. So you got the 3 different apps, you got to work out which one it is. It sort of wastes a bit of time, whereas a supercharger you just plug in and walk away.
And charge, the one in Geraldton.
Smart Charge.
Smart Charge as well.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's 4, and there's probably another 3 apps as well. So.
On the other charging stations that you found around, not Tesla ones, did you find that you needed adapters to make the car fit them?
Most of them not. Most of them had a CCS2, so combined charging standard Type 2 connector, which is what all the newer Teslas accept. Yeah. So that was fine. There was, I think, one that had a CHAdeMO, but it also had a CCS2, so it wasn't a...
No adapter. No, you just plug it straight in. You go to the DC charger. CCS2 is a quasi-standard for Australia, so you just plug it straight in and you go.
Okay, so there's no point in buying any adapters or anything like that?
Zero. Not for Model 3s or Ys.
Not for the supercharging or the fast DC. The fast DC chargers come tethered with their own cables, so you don't have to. And yeah, most of 99.99% will have a CCS2. But yeah, we did actually carry quite a few different cables. I'll see if I can open my front. So Rob, I think, has already showed everyone. So that's just obviously your standard Type 2. Which I got to use once in Broome.
Mine. Yep.
And then there's obviously the Clones charger, which has the 32 amp 5-pin 3-phase plug, which you can plug into those sockets, and that's probably what we use the most. We also had a faster charger as well, and then actually you've got, I think...
we also had a 20 amp to 32 amp adapter. Because there are a couple of places such as Northam and Pardue actually has a 20 amp outlet, but that's just so you can plug the comms charger into that.
And just for redundancy, bought an extra UMC, and just in case you don't want to be in the middle of nowhere and it fails, so I had 2 of those, and yeah, had plenty of adapters that Harold lent me.
which was 20 amp and 32 amp.
I just made that up myself, so if you get an electrician, they can just make it up. I don't think they're actually readily for sale.
I did find one.
It's a teeny tiny bit dodgy.
I did find one that I found two for hire at about $20 a day. I found one for about $256, which seemed way overpriced because the ends are about $30–40, and then you've got the little bit of cable in between. So two ends at $30–40 each, bit of cable, and then the labour to put it together. So
it is important to stress it is off-label. Technically, you would have to have a 20 amp circuit breaker in series for it to be a fully compliant adapter.
And I found ones with and without it. So, Nigel.
Why?
Why the why, or
No, why?
The answer, Nigel, is why not?
Look, the whole purpose was we just felt that there's really three main stumbling blocks that are preventing the wide take-up of EVs in Australia. And number one is undoubtedly chargers, the charging network. Number two, education. People just don't understand, don't know, and government policy. So we just thought that our trip addressed all three, and we're still doing things now. Harold's spoken to quite a few owners, as have I, and we're going to donate some three-phase plugs and see if we can get a few more plugs out there. And even the existing ones that only have the one plug, because I had a situation in Belladonna where, actually before that, where there was a gentleman coming from Melbourne to Perth. Luckily, Rob told me about him because he noticed him on PlugShare, and I did ring some of the homesteads that I knew I was going through and gave them my number and asked them to pass my number to him so that we could coordinate, so that we wouldn't be stuck in the same spot at the same time if there's only one socket. But I did by accident ring one place and say, look, I'm going to be going through there tomorrow morning. Any chance I could use your socket to charge? More than happy to more than pay my way. And they said, well, yeah, but there's already a car here. I went, oh, right. So I did ask him to pass my number to him. Unfortunately, he didn't call me that night, but when I came in the morning, he was 100% charged, and we were able to somewhat coordinate things so that we wouldn't charge in the same spot at the same time. But these are the sort of things you have to do when there isn't a proper charging network. But if we had a proper charging network, there'd be no range anxiety, there wouldn't be any of this. And yeah, we're a good 5 years behind, Europe and the US. So we just need to get a move on.
Did you take spare tyres?
Yes. Yep, we took the modern spare, which is a skinny spare, which it's in a bag.
I don't have one here, no.
I've taken mine out as well. But it's great because it's got all the tools you need in the bag, and it's fairly convenient to bring around. But yeah, we basically took it 13,500 Ks and did what you want to do, which is not use it. Which is, yeah.
I also took a electric scooter along, which I pretty much didn't use very much.
How many times?
Shut up, Harold. Shut up, Harold. Harold tried to persuade me. He said, "You're kidding yourself. You never use it. That's going to be the bane of your existence." And I didn't listen. I did take it. I must admit, the few times I did use it, it was very handy. The reason is we actually took a faster charger, which we were hoping to get 2 weeks beforehand, and Harold was going to change it all around to make it portable, but unfortunately we only got it a day before we left, so that took up all the space. And when we were charging at AC speeds, be it technically DC, we had to have the door open and the windows open for the fans, etc. So I couldn't just leave the car with the door open and go scootering around everywhere. But we both had Starling dishes with us as well.
That's the Dorothy Dixer I've got for you. Just
oh,
wait.
sorry.
Just wait.
So, no, hang on. I think Pete
Pete's got a question.
Does the modern spare Model 3 fit?
No, it's a different one.
Unfortunately,
The
frustratingly different.
same, but the diameter is different.
They'll sell you a tyre you can put on the same rig.
And a big. So it's bigger, it's a physically larger diameter, but the same stock pattern. So they're a different load wheel.
Which is a real shame, but just if anyone's planning a trip and you need a tyre or a wheel, the club has 3 or 4 actually. As long as you're a financial member, $20 to sign up for a year, you get to use those or borrow those free of charge. And we've got cables as well. and charges to lend you as well.
Hang on, so wait till this car goes past. His electric motor. So, Alex, can you ask that question that you thought up all for yourself? As loud as you can, because we've got a loud engine here. Go for it.
How did you guys find the mobile reception? Obviously you had Starlink with you as well, but...
Telstra, I don't know if it's just me or my phone or the car, but Telstra had really crappy reception throughout a lot of Australia. What I found...
no reception.
No reception. I was in Daly Waters, just a bit south of Katherine, and it's a super busy tourist precinct, and it had 4 bars of 4G, so I had fairly good voice communications, but I couldn't check into PlugShare, I couldn't tweet anything out, couldn't get any internet at all, and it was really, really frustrating. And even though Starlink's guaranteed service level is about here, sort of south of this line, and it was something like 1500 Ks, Daly Waters 1500 Ks north of that guaranteed service level, I just turned on Starlink and boom, I got like 50 megabits per second, and I could use it, I could tether the car to it so it could navigate and all that sort of stuff. So mobile communications, the Kimberley was actually surprisingly good. Most of the Kimberley on the highway was covered. The Pilbara's patchy, and Gascoyne and Southwest, we know what it's like. The Territory was just like this big black hole. All you had was about 10 Ks either side of a roadhouse, or say Katherine or whatever. Queensland was similar, pretty patchy, but Starlink was just rock solid. Even though it's off-label, but their region of coverage is actually extending further north, and by the end of this year it'll be all of Australia.
So what did you have to carry for to be able to connect to Starlink?
Sorry?
What did you have to
Just
carry?
a dish. Just a dish and
it's a rectangular dish, which I actually had, I've got photos of it on Twitter. I actually had a bit of sponge that I just basically squashed between the passenger seat headrest and the glass roof, and then the shaft basically just sort of like dangles down. So normally Starlink likes to actually orient itself in a more favourable position, but this thing was just clamped facing vertically up to the sky, and it worked perfectly well.
What do you power from 4-volt socket or?
No, well actually this is one thing that we found is the Model Ys actually have a lithium ion accessory battery which is 15 volts, 15 and a half volts, so rather than 12. So I had a little inverter, just a 12 volt to 240 volt inverter, didn't work, and neither did Harold's, but Harold ended up...
So unfortunately the so-called 12 volt battery is actually 15 and a half, and most of the better inverters freak out and they go out on an over voltage alarm. So the only way I could fix that was to actually bring the equivalent of like a small motorbike battery with me and power the Starlink inverter, well, an inverter off a battery, separate battery, to power the Starlink. So that means I could run the Starlink for about 3 hours before that battery went flat. So I didn't use it all the time. It wasn't quite as awesome as having broadband all the time, but I didn't need it all the time really. But I've come up with a solution, which is you just put a couple of diodes in series with that supply, and then that cuts down the voltage just enough so that the inverters don't freak out. I've also since found out that there are inverters that can tolerate the higher voltages, but they're significantly dearer. So
it will work with the Model 3 perfectly fine, because Model 3 the older ones. Yeah. When did they start putting in the lithium-ion batteries?
Last
about
few
6 months ago.
Yeah.
So yeah, all the older ones will work fine. The new ones you'll obviously need to either do what Harold's doing or get a battery. In terms of comms, I took along a satellite phone that I just hired just to be safe, being a newbie at this. And we both carried CB radios, which were really handy. So talking to trucks in terms of passing road trains, I was able to draft behind a few trucks safely. I just had it on autopilot at a safe distance back, and just hovered my foot above the brake and never had any issues. We should mention that, I think I speak for the both of us, we did about 99% of the driving on autopilot. In my experience, the autopilot was virtually flawless. There was a couple of instances, so one, I probably overrode it a bit too quick, didn't give it a chance to recover or correct itself, but it shouldn't have made that mistake in the first place. And then there was one section where I tried to go off onto another road rather than keep going straight, so I just corrected. But that was it on the highway. In the city, you'll know that, you know. And these are just standard autopilot, so we didn't have enhanced autopilot, we didn't have FSD. So this is just a free autopilot, which is basically traffic aware, cruise control, and fairly advanced lane keeping combined.
I had a couple of times where it would freak out at a mirage on the road, and it would do like a little bit of a slight brake, and then it would be okay. Or if there was a truck that was a long way away, it sometimes would freak out and it would sort of stop, even though it was so far away. I think it couldn't quite work out how far away it was, so it was sort of erring on the side of caution. But once the truck came a bit closer, or you pushed it closer to the truck, then it latched on and it worked perfectly well.
But it wasn't like slamming on the anchors like the cars used to do 2 years ago. It was a much more measured, you know, a feathering of the brake. And in the 13,700 odd, 600 odd kilometres that we did, I maybe had a phantom braking event maybe half a dozen times.
Yeah, me too.
So
yeah, not many at all. One of the things that wasn't as awesome was the fact that when you're on autopilot, the car insists, the Tesla Vision cars insist on having automatic high beams on. So at night time, we got really used to going tap, tap, push. So if you think of the steering wheel, you go double tap to engage autopilot, and then you got to push to disengage high beams. And what it would do is, for the rest of the duration of you being on autopilot, it would be disabled. Except then, if the truck had come the other way, then you'd want to then re-engage it. So you'd sort of be playing this game of tap, tap, push.
That will get solved with an over-the-air software update, a free one. So it won't be a long-term issue. But at the moment, the cars have just gone from getting rid of the radar and going on vision only. So it's not just that; it's also the windscreen wipers, the automatic windscreen wipers when it's raining. They were a bit of a pain in the behind. There was early in the morning, we'd obviously get a lot of bugs on the grille as well as the windscreen. And I found that if I didn't put the windscreen wipers on manually, the car was fine. But when I wanted to try and get rid of some of the bugs and put the windscreen wipers on, and then autopilot took over, then it wanted to put the
it kept going.
And it kept going.
And you have to disengage autopilot, then turn off auto wipers, let any mist or whatever, that little bit of moisture sort of dry off, and then you could re-engage autopilot.
But these are just sort of growing pains. They will get solved within a couple of months.
One thing I did note is it was really foggy going into Canberra, and I noticed that the car actually then would freak out. It was fairly thick fog, so because it couldn't see, it then would slow down. And
the rear-wheel drives, they don't have the fog lights, like the performance there. You can see on the Model 3, they've got proper fog lights. So yeah, I started looking for the fog lights, and I remembered I was in a rear-wheel drive.
So guys, what was your average consumption for the trip?
156 watt hours.
And mine was 161.
Here's a lead foot.
You just use more going anti-clockwise.
Oh yeah, that must be it. Yeah, it must be the gravitational force.
It's more uphill that way.
Is there anyone else who's got a question out there?
Probably just one more.
Oh, I'll go for
What's the minimum length of cable, extension cable, you probably need to safely?
That's actually a very good question. There was one, so Harold lent me a 3-phase extension cord, which actually came in handy probably about 4 or 5 times. And it was, where are you? It was from about here up to about here.
Yeah, about 10 metres.
10 metres,
yeah. So, but I never needed it for that length, but probably at least half a length of that, at least. So if you combine that with like the cones charger, which is 6 metres or 4 metres or something like that, you should have enough. But
so it's just for the 3-phase, yeah?
Just for the 3-phase, yeah.
It might be useful, even though we didn't use it in that sense, if say that bay is iced, or there's a sea container there, or a freezer truck, or for whatever reason, I mean, we're talking about roadhouses here, not urban areas, obviously. So it's just that little bit extra assurance that you don't have to sort of do this Tetris of trying to get your car in where it shouldn't be. Again, you can borrow those for road trips for free from the club. So I think mine's about 15 metres. And for instance, when I was driving around in my Model X, I was at Tennant Creek. and the plug that was supposed to be there was dug up by a backhoe, so I had to actually plug into the Red Rooster. So what this manager did was he unplugged one of his fat fryers. I plugged in the extension cord. It ran along the behind the counter, out through the drive-through window and into the car park. And that's when that extension cord would really help. Otherwise, I would have been stuck.
And does the amperage go down? Like
no, you might lose a little bit of volt drop, but actually 3-phase is quite balanced, so it's actually nowhere near as bad as 3-phase. So I might have lost 2-3 volts, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't make any real difference.
Because other extension cords, right? They derate then, right?
Yes, but these are fairly. I think they're 6 square mil, and they're perfectly fine.
Dwayne.
So you can do less than 14 days. How far is that off the fastest one?
That is the fastest.
That is. So my previous, in my Model X, I did a corrected 18 days. So if you take this standard route, my last day was at Norseman, and I took an extra day because I went by Esperance and Albany because I wanted to go to our only supercharger in Eton. Of course, now we don't have to do that. We can go straight to Carrinup. So you can say my corrected time, first time was 18 days, which Pete broke, so he's done it in 17. And then I've done, the second time round, I've done it in 14. So as far as we're aware, I think that's the fastest.
Oh, yeah,
not that I was racing, it's just that's just the way the time and motion went.
Just something on that. The fastest petrol car to go around in Australia was a Land Cruiser, 200 series Land Cruiser with 273 litres of diesel.
So it's a long range filter, not standard ones. Yeah.
So that was 4 drivers, and the passengers slept in the Land Cruiser when they weren't driving, which is really unsafe. It's a very unsafe method. When Harold did this trip and Peter did this trip, they stopped every night and had a proper sleep. They also had rest breaks when the car was charging. And that's critical to have those rest breaks, and as Pete will probably tell you, at the end of the day's driving, Peter wasn't exhausted, he was sort of tired, but he wasn't that dangerously exhausted. Is that correct?
And that was 8 days, so that Land Cruiser did in 8 days, but that's basically 24/7 driving.
Yeah, no, I carried a mattress in the back, which I can sort of show you. Once you put the front seats forward, there's more than 2 meters of length there, so even the tallest person can sleep in there quite comfortably. And yeah, I was able to sleep. I slept every night in the car. You know, sometimes I had camp mode on. A camp mode controls the temperature, keeps the car nice and cool or warm, however you like it, throughout the whole night. Other times I didn't even have that on. But yeah, it was quite comfortable. The benefit of having the mattress there and the fact that I wasn't putting it up and taking it down, that was always there. If I had a 2 or 3 hour break while I was charging and I was getting a bit tired, I could just jump in the back and have a quick power nap and be right to go for the next leg.
So Pete punished himself and camped in his car the whole time. I did bring a mattress and all that sort of stuff, but touch wood, I avoided having to use it. So,
well, I don't know if I'd use the word punish, because like at Fitzroy Crossing, I had the option of a campsite with a 15 amp caravan socket, powered, or a $273 tent without air conditioning. So, and the campsite was $40. So I thought Tesla for $40 or a tent for $273, you know, no air conditioning, it was a no-brainer. So, yeah.
How much does camp mode deplete your battery overnight?
Yeah, it does deplete it a bit. Obviously depends on the outside temperature at the time and the difference between outside and inside, but never more than about 10% of your battery. But another consideration is if you are in a caravan park and if there is a tent right next to you, because the fans are going, just be mindful of that. So maybe park next to a caravan, or you know, or just let them know that you will have the fans on. I mean, it's just sort of background noise, and it's, you know, you will get used to, you will go to sleep. But when it first comes on, yeah, it's probably best to let people know.
And speaking of temperature variation, the coldest I saw was -2 on the Nullarbor in the morning, up to about 38, I think I saw.
I got a 39 in Darwin.
You got 39?
Yep.
Awesome.
39, got a photo of it.
There you go.
I beat you on something, Harold. I beat you on something.
Before we have any more questions, just a group question here. Wait till this bloody vehicle goes past. Right. Group question is, who's hungry? So, should we finish this up now, grab some food and we can mingle and you can ask questions till 5 o'clock? We're going to have Elon Jet. So, do you want to start ordering some food?
Take it quickly. Let's just ask. Preconditioning, you ever come into your calculation at all for your range?
Not into the calculation because he only ever does it with the superchargers, and like we said before, with superchargers you don't have to worry about your range, your efficiency, anything. So yeah, it would only come in with the on the supercharger network, so it wasn't affected.
Came into us, we had Keith, his supercharger.
Yep.
Put it on too early and preconditioned.
Yeah, it will take you down, that's fine, but it will never take you, it's smart enough to know not to precondition too much so you don't reach your destination.
And I had that where I actually got to Clare with, that was actually a hard trip, because I had to go uphill. There's about 400 metres altitude from Port Augusta, and I arrived there with 1%, and it wasn't preconditioning because it knew better not to waste energy. One great thing about these cars, because they're the standard range, they're the LFP batteries, is you just set it to 100%. And you didn't have to worry about this thing of, if they're the NCA batteries, the long range cars, you've got to then go, well, I really want 100% because I'm saving time, because if I leave full, I can go, I spend less time in the daytime charging. So then you go, well, do I set it to 100 and just accept my battery's going to stew for a few hours while I'm sleeping? Or you can do things like go to 90, go to sleep, wake up, set it to 100, and then let it do that in half an hour. Or you can do the scheduled charging or scheduled departure, as long as you can trust it.
Or you can do is what Rob and Robin do, is they've got a knack of timing it so that by the time they've packed up their tent, it's just hit 100%.
Yes. Yep.
And off they go. But that requires a bit of experience.
One little thing that Pete found out the hard way, and I told him the solution about half a day before he didn't need it anymore, was sometimes the car doesn't change its time zone as you go across states. And the way you do that is I'm not exactly sure whether you tap it incessantly for a couple of seconds on the time itself, or you just press and hold onto it for a couple of seconds. But if you do both, it will then manually look up the time zone and change the time, providing you've got internet, which on some borders you don't.
And so what happened was coming into Northern Territory, changed the time no problems because I had reception. But going from NT to Queensland, there must have been no connection. So I obviously tried to, the GPS would have told it they'd somewhere else, probably would have tried to look for the time, couldn't find it, and then never tried again. So it stayed on NT time until Harold said, you just have to hold on to the...
but Pete was almost about to get into South Australia, which meant he would have been in the correct time zone again. So it didn't actually matter. But
yeah, that's true.
Someone else had a question.
Sorry, with the three-phase leads, I'm assuming you need a neutral on there as well.
Yes.
Is that quite common when you get out in the bush, or...?
Well, the ones on PlugShare all have neutrals.
No, but if you go to like farms or something like that, or you haven't had to do anything like that?
No, we didn't. No, because if you just look at PlugShare and you put 3-phase as the filter, there is an unbroken string of pearls. Although, having said that, there was, it's gotten easier and harder. So Sandfire Roadhouse no longer is welcoming of EVs charging on 3-phase for personal reasons. Dunmurra, which I used 4 years ago, is offline, but it's been replaced by in a town called Elliot, where a 3-phase is. So if you look on PlugShare, there is actually an unbroken string of pearls, although the biggest gap is at the moment between Broome and Fitzroy Crossing. That's 400 kilometres, so no matter what you do, you've got to do 400 kilometres, unless you go up to Derby, and there is a 3-phase there, but it's a 40 kilometre round, each way diversion off the highway. So Derby's just here, and it's 40 kilometres from the highway each way. So you're basically costing yourself 80 kilometres. But if that's what you need to get the charge, then by all means do it.
So 32 amp 3-phase is pretty common.
Mostly, except Pardue is 20, and Northam is 20 as well. So you need that little adapter.
Whereabouts in Northam do you charge?
It's near the McDonald's. It's on Plugshare.
It's on Plugshare.
Yeah.
So Harold, that 400 Ks where you
Broome to Fitzroy.
Broome to Fitzroy. What speed did you drop down to make that?
Actually, Pete was fortunate enough to draft behind a truck. I had nothing to draft behind, so I had to do it just by myself.
About
and
70?
I think I averaged about 90, but I started at 70 to get the runs on the board.
So you get closer and adjust the speed necessary.
Yeah, and you can sort of see that. I mean, like I said, unfortunately, I've got this very rough app that is very helpful. It ignores. It's not like a better route planner where it considers altitude and all that sort of stuff. So there's a bit of a caveat there. You've got to be careful that you're not going to gain altitude. If you're going to lose altitude, that's fine because it's a bonus. But that just helped. But you can also get that measure on the Tesla's range plotter, trip plotter, but it's not as responsive. So you might get a bit worried. But if you basically did it about 90 k's an hour, you'd be okay. The other thing too is up the Hume Highway. I was blasting up the Hume Highway at 110, which is the speed limit, and getting something like 146 watt hours per kilometre at 110 because the highway's smooth. The biggest killer of range in the outback is the chip seal road. You hear all that road noise and that's just wasted energy, and it's severe. That is the worst thing to range, apart from gale winds that Pete had to endure on this last day, which...
Yeah, got a 40 k an hour, almost headwind. It was on a slight angle, but I was averaging 156 watt hours over 13,000 kilometres, and that trip it got to 231 watt hours. 220 was the average for that whole trip because of the rain and that really strong headwind. So there's a few things to, and that included a bit of drafting as well. So, but on the drafting, it's not just a sort of a black and white thing. You know, you get a truck, you're fine. You don't get one, you're not. Because you've got to know how much you've got spare capacity you've got, and then you've got to know how much you're going to use to get up to the speed of that truck. And you've got to look at the shape of it. You know, if it's nice and square, then you can probably tuck in behind it, depending on what speed they're going as well. So some of the trucks were going 110 and that was too fast for me. I found that I was still losing range being behind them, so I had to let them go. Whereas some caravans,
Jaycos work pretty well.
Jaycos were great, or the big, the higher vans, the camper vans, they're a big square shape. They're pretty good, but I generally preferred the road trains because I knew that there's no way that I'd never be able to outbrake a road train.
So to make it clear though, Pete, you called them up and asked them every time.
On the CB radio every time.
If you don't ask the truck driver to draft, he'll drop his back tyres on the gravel and he'll break your windscreen. Yeah. So you've got to ask them before you do this.
And surprisingly, they were just so accommodating. This one bloke, I got on the CB, you know, is it all right if I tag along behind you? Yeah, mate, no worries. Feel free to tuck right up. And I'm like, okay. So I got within 2 on the autopilot, and then he goes, oh, feel free to flick your lights on. And I thought, lights on? I've already got my lights on. It must mean high beams. So I said, you mean high beams? And he said, yeah, mate. And I thought, hang on, surely he's not. So can I just clarify? You want me to tuck right up behind you and put my high beams on? Yeah, it's all good, bro.
He's probably giving him more light around the side.
Possibly, I don't know, but yeah, really accommodating. There was one person who I tried to get on the CB radio quite a few times. He wasn't responding, so then I pulled back. Just before I started pulling back, he sort of slowed down and went off to the side. So I thought, okay, he obviously doesn't want me behind him, so I overtook him. But then I saw him at the next service station, and I went up to him and said, look, any chance you're going to Southern Cross? He said, yes, I am. And I said, oh, look, I was the car that overtook you. I was behind you. I was hoping to draft behind you. And he said, oh, usually I hate people tailgating me, but now that I know the reason, absolutely go for it. So, you know, getting on the CB and talking to him makes all the difference.
Pete mentioned camper vans. One pro tip is if you're anywhere in this region in the Kimberley, especially up here, Fitzroy Crossing, Halls Creek in particular, put pin to drive on your car.
Yes.
So I basically saw a high-speed chase where I thought someone was going to die that day, where there were 3 ladies who had hired a camper trailer. I think, well, it had Victorian number plates. I'm not sure where they were from or where the camper thing was from. But they were at the police station outside of their camper trailer thing and talking to the police about something that was stolen out of their van. And then one of the locals snuck in, jumped in the seat, the keys were in the car, and he took off. And there was like about a 40-minute high-speed chase going round and around the town.
I said on TikTok.
Yeah, burning up and down the streets, blasting through. I've got recordings of it, and it was my worst day because I literally thought, someone was going to die that day. So this happens all the time, and this doesn't apply to Teslas obviously, but they'll actually do things like you're filling up with petrol, and you've got your hand on the nozzle, and if your keys are in the car, they'll jump in and just take off.
And it's usually
it'll snap off your nozzle and whatever. So for Teslas, because your phone does work some distance from your car, just put pin to drive on. I know it's something we wouldn't normally think about doing, but I definitely thought about it then. Fortunately, when I was watching this high-speed chase going up and down the street, my car was plugged in, so obviously you can't drive it when it's plugged in. But do turn on pin to drive if you don't use it regularly in the northwest, just in case.
Want to eat, guys?
Well, that was really interesting to have been there. I hope you found the video okay. The audio was a bit iffy, I'm sure. But it was a great thing that those two have done. First 2 people to do it in a Model Y. And there you go. It can be done. Bit of a struggle at times, but it can be done. Thanks very much for watching. Please don't forget, click that like and subscribe buttons down below. And I'll see you all soon.